Okay.
Good. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Women's with a View. Tonight we're going to have a Scottish special. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask everyone to introduce themselves. I'll go by the order where I am. That's next to me. So that will be Star. You can introduce yourself. Oh, you're a mute. You're a mute, Star.
I didn't want to go first. I don't know what to say. My name is I am going to the Scottish Parliament I'm going there actually tomorrow to fight against the GRA, and I've also been in the Scottish prison system, and I've also been in there with two men. So I'm mostly here to speak about that.
Thank you. Jenny?
Sorry.
I'm Jenny. I'm from a group called Soul Sisters. We campaign for sex-based rights for women. We do a load of grassroots campaigning, so out in the street talking to women, putting out leaflets and things like that. And I will also be in front of the Parliament along with Star as we're doing a big protest against the GRA.
Elaine.
Yeah, I'm Elaine. Hello. I'm a physiotherapist. I work in, I really must stop saying I work in fannies because it upsets my peers. I'm a pelvic health physiotherapist, so I deal with women that have got problems with continence and sexual dysfunctions and postnatal injuries and all that sort of thing. And that also includes people that have had gender reassignment surgery or having treatment. So I started to get a bit worried about not knowing what to do with these people because there wasn't really much in the way of training, and landed up being told to educate myself, so I did. And I am therefore also going on. You've made me worry a wee bit, Star, because you said tomorrow. I'm hoping it's Thursday. Sometimes I get my days muddled, and
I'm going tomorrow for the few drinks.
Yeah, very wise. So yeah, I'm looking forward to Thursday.
Yeah, thank you so much. So yeah, if anyone hasn't guessed so far, that is the common denominator. Thursday, the big rally in outside Scottish Parliament, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, I can't wait to hear about that. We also have our regular rooms member Tania, but we haven't seen her for a while, and she's been doing some really exciting things. Hi, Tania.
Hi.
Let us know quickly what you're going to be telling us about later.
Oh, I'll just be talking about the WDI conference that happened in the United States that we held in Washington, D.C. At a very swanky hotel called the DuPont Hotel in DuPont Circle, which is like a historic place for civil rights in America.
Yes, we heard all about that. It looked really nice. All right, so Star, I specifically asked for you to come and join us because obviously I've heard your story more than a couple of times, and it never fails to impact. So could you let us know exactly what happened to you and why you are doing what you're doing now?
Yeah, sure. So I was in the Scottish prison system not long ago. I think it was four years ago. I mean, I won't waste time getting into the backstory, but the quick version was my friend and I were sexually assaulted, and the police came. She was given the police tried to give her a £30 fine for slapping the guy or whatever it was. These fines that they can just be judge and jury over in the street. £30 fine, whatever. So I'd said to the policeman, why is she getting a £30 fine? She hasn't done anything, and we've both been sexually assaulted. I was quickly told to, are we allowed to swear on here? F up. As is quite usual for the police in my area anyway, or you're getting done with a breach of the peace. If you try and answer back or explain your position, you're done with a breach of the peace. So the handcuffs were quickly put on me, and I was arguing with them, you know, because I'm standing there thinking, how the hell is this happening? So then they were adding on resisting arrest. Anyway, so a whole, you know, load of nonsense. So I ended up being put into prison on remand for 7 weeks. So yeah, while I was there, I was first taken to Cortonville, which is, now I've never been in prison before and I wasn't sentenced, which there's difference between being found guilty and being sentenced and then being held on remand until you go to trial or whatever. So I wasn't sentenced, I was held on remand. So yeah, sorry, I got so confused there.
That's all right. Go on.
So I was put in there, and the first place you go is Cortonville, which is a only women's prison. So I was only sent there for, you're kind of sent there for the weekend, I think some people are. So if I'm saying anything wrong, MD can, you know, pick me up. This isn't gospel. I don't really know, but this is just my experience. So
Yeah,
put there for the weekend, and then they place you where you're going to be placed. So when I was in that women's prison, it is a prison where there's two to a cell. So luckily enough, I was sharing a cell with a woman, but I didn't know any of this was going on. I didn't know anything about trans people, transgender, like I didn't know any of this stuff. So I wasn't thinking, oh, thank God I'm in with a woman. I was just thinking, oh my God, why am I here? And I was just suicidal.
yeah, shell shock.
Missing my new baby, yeah. So anyway, I did have a woman in that situation, in that cell, but now I know the situation. There weren't any trans people or men LARPing as women in Cortonville. But if they were, they would have probably been in with the women sharing a cell. But anyway, I was sharing with a woman, and then I was moved to Gateside Prison in Greenock. So that was convenient for me because it's 15 minutes away from my family and friends and my children. So, but it's like one of the, I think it's the oldest prison in Scotland or something. So it's totally run down. And I went in, and when I first went in, I was given a condemned room. And then this woman came in, and I didn't know who she was. And she was like, get her out of here, blah, blah, blah. I now know that woman is Rona Hotchkiss.
Oh.
So anyway, I don't know, because I could talk about this all day. So that's in there. And by the time I got to Greenock Prison, there were 2 men there.
Okay.
In the women's section.
And were they put each with other women, or did they have their own cells, or?
So when you go into the Greenock prison, it's a men's prison, but there's a women's wing. So it's not a women's prison. So, but obviously they separate the males from the females. So in that prison, and I suppose you could, if you can imagine like your old-fashioned prisons like Porridge, where you get like maybe, you know, 25 cells on the bottom, and then you get all the metal stairs, and then you get 25 on the top.
Oh yeah.
So that's the way it was in there. So there was 50 women, well, 50 spaces for women. So there were 48 women and 2 men. But they were all single cells. But it's a very old prison, so there are no showers in the cells or anything. It's like, you know, your literal old brick and stuff, bars on the windows and all that sort of stuff. So at least you were on your own, and so you're not at risk of that. But you have the showering aspect because it's so old that it's not been updated that you don't have your own shower in your room.
Wow.
Jesus.
And how was the whole experience, knowing that there was men with you in there?
Well, I mean, that was the thing. Like,
obviously you had communal times, didn't you? And you had times you had to share showers with them. All right.
Yeah. So we were mostly locked up for, I mean, approximately 23 hours a day. So on your own. So it's not as if you don't have much time outside yourself anyway, unless you know, maybe go to education or go to work, if there is any space for you to go. The men always get more than the women, so the women don't actually have a lot of choice. Like, for example, you can go to physical education. So I suppose the guy who works there must work there like Monday to Friday. The guy who does the training, you know, maybe 9 to 5. But the men, there's only ever 1 hour a day that the women get to choose to go to the gym, and the men get all the rest of the slots because there's more of them.
Wow.
And more often than not, I would have to choose between going to the gym or going to my family visit. So I would obviously choose my family visit, but then there's no other options. But the men have like so many different options at times that they can go. Yeah, so so when I saw the man in there, it was just I mean, I was already just, my head was spinning. I just did not know what was going on. I couldn't. And then I just saw this guy, and the first one I saw, he was, honestly, it must have been about 6'3" or bigger, and he was about 30 stone.
Oh my God.
You know, you can wear your own clothes in there, but a lot of the women, they don't have their own clothes, right? So you wear like your prison uniform, so it's like grey trousers and a red top for that certain prison. But this guy was wearing like just black tracksuit bottoms, a black t-shirt, black like big black working boots. He had no GRC, he didn't take any, but I found this out later, no GRC, didn't take any hormones. He was in there for, well, what he said was domestic violence against his girlfriend. But I mean, if I take his word for it at 100%, then, you know, that's the least thing. But if he's willing to admit that, then I'm pretty sure it's probably more. But even if his word for it and take it on the list of domestic violence against his girlfriend enough to put him in prison, with no GRC, no hormones, he's clearly a straight man, he's committed crimes against women, and he's put in with the women. So even though you don't get out a lot, you know, they shower, if you go to education, they're there. If you go to physical education, they're there. If you're lucky enough to get a recreation, they're there. If you go to the showers, they're there. So because it's very old, to be honest, I can't even remember if there are any showers in the Cortonvale one that I went to first, because I was just so, like, I can't even remember. But in this one, because it's so old, everybody gets let out. You have to ask for a shower. If you don't ask for a shower the night before, you don't get it. So if you're lucky enough to get out for the shower, everybody gets out at the same time. So there's showers in the bottom and there's showers in the top, because there's 2 levels. So, but it's literally just kind of what you would get in school, you know, like school shower blocks, but just like with little shitty curtains.
Yeah.
So everybody just goes to the same shower block. They do their same, you know. So at the end of the day, anytime the women are allowed out, the men are allowed out. You know, they are not, you know. And the worst thing is, I was actually in prison with a woman called Naomi Fee, and she like done something really, really bad to her toddler, and they used to let her out at different times for showers to protect her. Obviously, I didn't know that, but I had to ask, and it was to protect her because she'd done something to a child. But yet they let the men out at the same time as the women and don't care about protecting them.
Yeah. So I mean, is this what, I mean, obviously once you left, when you was there,
Well, I'll just before we go into me leaving,
yeah, go on.
while I was in there, I went and got a contraceptive coil put in, and I've never had any contraception. And I had a very, very traumatic birth with my last child. I ended up in a mother and baby unit, psychiatric ward. I think the average stay was 32 days and I was there for 3 months. They just kept, I had so many problems, like Elaine's saying, with your, your physical, your pelvic floor and whatever. And I just, was getting fobbed off by the NHS and whatever. That was absolutely traumatizing for me to have to go and get that. But I just could not put myself at risk of one of these men. The other guy was a murderer, but at least he was gay, so I wasn't probably at risk of him raping me. There's so many other different risks, but at least rape probably wasn't one of them. It was more the big massive guy. And I thought, how could I go home pregnant? So I had to go and get that done, but I'm now overdue to get it out and I keep putting it off and putting it off. And I'm starting to believe in it, I know that I should be going, but I'm just like, I went in there and got it because I had to, and I'm so traumatized for the birth that I just keep putting it off, and I know I need to go. But this is what I mean, it has effects much longer than what anybody, could imagine.
Yeah. So when you came out, how did you get into, did you go looking for information about this happening anywhere else?
No, so I actually thought it was normal. I just thought that must be the way it is. That's what they're allowed to do. Because obviously you had to call them women. You couldn't misgender them. You were warned, you have to call them this or you'll not get your visits. You have to call them this or you won't get your money. You have to call them this or you won't get out your cell.
Wow.
And let's not be naive about the fact that whether it's legal or lawful or not in there, it doesn't really matter. Nobody really cares about the men and women in prison. So believe me, these things happen. So no, when I get out, I just had thought that was normal. And I come from quite a traumatic background, so it was just something that I had to go in and get my head down and get on with and get it done. And I came out, and then COVID happened, and I set up like a community group I tried to set up a group for my friends that kind of stayed not too close to me, so that if they needed anything we could help each other. But it ended up with about 11,000 or 20, I don't know what it was, so many thousand people on it. And I ended up looking after them for about 2 years during COVID. My whole community set up things in every area, in 15 different areas. And then COVID was kind of coming to an end. And I remember making a comment about something about toilets. And I remember saying, don't get your knickers in a twist about trans women. And I didn't even really know anything about it. And I swear to God, I started getting so much hate, like all this. Like you said, Elaine, go and educate yourself. You're a total bigot, blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, no, I'm the kind of person like that just kicks in my fight or flight. And I'm like, do not come for me unless I send for you. Like, I was not even trying to do anything horrible, or I don't even know what the hell is going on. So I was advised to go, and J.K. Rowling was a bigot or whatever. So I read it and I thought, well, I totally agree. So my whole account got banned on Facebook. I couldn't help it anymore. It all got shut down. I thought, right, fine, I'm going on to Twitter. And so here I've been ever since. And all I remember is when I was in there, as I said, it's not a purity competition, but I think I was like the only woman in there that didn't take any drugs. These women are, as I've said before, I was really lucky. I don't have any problems like that. I had family and friends to come and look after me, to send me money, to visit me, to write me letters. We're put in there as a punishment. That is our punishment, to take away our liberty, but to then punish women further by putting them at risk, which we know is happening, is just really, really cruel. But these women didn't have that sort of support at all, not anything like it. Most of them couldn't even read and write. And they were drugged up to the eyeballs because they were on their methadone because they couldn't get their heroin or whatever it was outside. Or they would share each other. I mean, they would pretend they would take it and then hide it under their tongue and, swap it with each other. So most of them weren't even on the medication they should have been on, because they just wanted to get the day over and done with, because they're locked up for 80 hours. So when I found out, you know, that keep prison single sex, and, you know, a few people that knew me had said, you know, that this is happening, no, they want to speak to you. So I just thought, so when I actually realised what was happening, and there was nobody else really speaking about it, like, because I don't want to be the one that's out there, but nobody else is speaking about it, nobody else is turning up. And as I said, you won't get these women from prison turning up at speakers' corners and stuff like that. Not you're going to be a very slim chance that somebody's going to do that, right? So if I can't do it for them, then who will? Because I'm waiting for, you know, and obviously other people maybe don't want to speak about it, you know, they're embarrassed, they've moved on, they've, you know, swag on with their life, or they don't want it, and you can totally understand that. They don't maybe want to drag up their past, so it's a massive thing. But it's been, what I found out is this has been going on for so long now, and everybody's talking about women's experience in prison, but nobody from prison is able to speak about it or verify experiences. So that's all I've been trying to do.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank
I
you
just
so
have
much.
to.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you. I think it's really, really helpful that you are being that voice, because, like you're saying, I haven't heard of any other women from that have been in prison and experienced what you did, being able to talk about it. And of course, you know, being women, they feel shame about having been in prison. Obviously, there's so many different reasons, and it doesn't really matter, does it? You know. So thank you so much for that. Right, Jenny, Soul Sisters. I hope you don't mind if I go to you next. I always look at your posts and all the you arrange events, don't you?
Yeah. We actually came together on Twitter during lockdown because we were watching the erosion of women's rights. The GRA was still proposed in Scotland about 2020. They were kind of pushing with that still. The hate crime bill, which didn't include women under sex, but it did include men that dress as women, particularly cross-dressers, not even people that consider themselves trans. And we were watching this unfold and nobody speaking up for women, and we thought we need to do something about this. So we couldn't protest during COVID. It was really quite difficult. So we did a shoe protest outside the Scottish Parliament, where we collected hundreds of pairs of shoes and we tied them all up in the suffragette coloured ribbon, and we got a photographer to take some pictures. And then we started travelling around other places, taking our shoes out. I spent a few months with
that was genius. I mean, that was really genius. I loved it. I submitted my own pair of shoes.
Yeah, a lot of women.
Yeah,
it was great to see lots of women join in online, taking pictures of their own shoes and things like that. It really helped support us as well. And my niece was delighted because she got to sit in the back of the car with hundreds of pairs of shoes that she could try on the whole time. But we went from that and we started doing things to just try and engage on this subject, get a bit of attention going. So we printed some information cards about what the GRA really meant for women, because we feel the Scottish Government hasn't been very clear on the consequences of Gender Recognition Act. They're proposing that people sign a self-declaration that they are living as, well, the opposite sex. They say the opposite gender. Now, it's a bit of paper that can be signed by anyone, so there's no diagnosis of gender dysphoria. Just pop up and sign a document. And I would equate it to like taking out a mobile phone contract. You know, you go and you sign something and you have obligations, but it's as easy as that, really. So we worked a while on sending out these little cards that just inform people of what the consequences of Gender Recognition Act reform would be. And we tried to put it in as blunt language as we could, but we were quite aware of, you know, the Hate Crime Act and looking at people being fired for being blunt about these things or saying men aren't women and things like that. We were delighted because we left some on a train in Glasgow and someone took a picture of them. We had a little QR code on them and they complained to ScotRail about these cards, and it gave us the most massive boost that we had.
I remember.
Because the QR code linked to our little blog that we have women from all over Scotland write blogs, and anyone can apply to write a piece for us. And so it linked straight to that, and people were like, where can I get these cards? Where can I? Some people started getting them. We send them out in the post to anyone that asks us for them. So we can't thank ScotRail or that complainant enough, to be honest. From that, we went on to do some street stalls where we were handing out. And again, it was one of those things that it was very difficult at the time, like 2020, 21, because nobody was sure what you could say and what you couldn't say. And a lot of this stuff, when women tried to talk about it, there was violent protests and things like that. So people were worried. So we decided to try and get out on the street and talk about it. And we started in the small towns. And then joined up with other feminist groups to do the bigger towns. And Star and I actually did one in Glasgow City Centre, which went brilliantly, I thought. Very little negative comments, a lot of people very positive about what we're doing. And so we're just continuing with that. We want ordinary women talking about this, everyone to opportunity to have their say, and various different topics that are impacting sex-based rights at the moment.
So does your cards, the information that explains everything that's going on about the GRC, and so you're actually letting people know this is what's happening, you need to be involved?
We started off with do you believe a man becomes a woman if he says so? Because that is the basis of it. And we started with asking those questions, and we talked about prisons, and we talked about one of the big issues is that they want anyone from 16 and above to be able to get a gender recognition certificate. Now, in Scotland, you would be in school till about 17, 18. So there's a little period of time where there can be teenagers in school will be able to get a gender recognition certificate, which is really quite dangerous, I think, because they also have privacy rights that come with a gender recognition certificate.
Boy, don't they?
And I don't think anyone in a certain level of education has really thought very much about what that might do, because they will, a 16, 17-year-old will not need parental consent to get a gender recognition certificate either. So it's things like that that we're really trying to lay out in as clear language as we possibly can.
Yeah, oh, that's brilliant. Do you find that when you're out on the like you said, there's a lot of interest, but you don't get hardly any pushback, do you? Because it's not like, well, once you're out there in the real world, you know, there's so many people that don't know, and you know, you get a lot done because you haven't got these protesters over here, you know.
Absolutely. We've found, I mean, we've had a couple of negative comments. I personally have had a couple of negative comments, but really not very much. And most people, when we went out and did our first stall, people were like, "What? No, this is crazy. What are you talking about?" And then about 6 months later, I remember doing a stall, and the press had by that time picked up on it, and because there was a number of years where the press weren't reporting on this kind of stuff. And the difference in our stall that day compared to 6 months previous, people are like, "Oh yeah, I've read about this. Oh yeah, someone gave me a leaflet. Oh, I've heard about this." So being out in the streets, you really notice the difference in people's knowledge, and you know, it's just a great opportunity to understand what people are worrying about, what they're talking about, and trying to get them involved.
Brilliant, that's excellent work. I mean, we've obviously we've been lucky here where we've had a stop to them doing the same here.
We're very jealous.
yeah, but then we actually, you know, we use some of your tactics that you're doing up there over here. So, you know, in my experience from looking at Twitter and what's going on, you know, we followed some of the things you were doing, you know, so you helped us, if you like. And I'm hoping that Thursday there's going to be some of English, the rest of the UK women that will come up and help you guys as well, you know, make some noise about it.
Yeah, there's been a great bonding element, I think, of the cross-border element, where women have just got together, and it's the same with Irish women that are fighting it, and American women. You know, it's been such an international movement of people kind of getting to know each other. So it's great when we see women in other countries supporting us and knowing that, you know, in different countries they're going through something very, very similar.
Yes, definitely. Oh, thank you so much about that, Jenny. And Elaine, I've heard things about you on the internet, but I don't actually know the full story of what happened to you. Do you mind going through it for us, please?
I am a pelvic health physio, and women don't often, we have the main problem that we have within physio in that field is getting women to come to clinic, because usually if you've got problems controlling your bowel, people are embarrassed about it. So it takes quite a lot for a woman to go and speak to a GP and say, you know, I'm wetting myself, I'm pooing myself, I've got pain in sex. And so this became a source of frustration to me at work, because if we can get them into clinic, we're really, really good. Like, you know, physio is really effective. If a woman's wetting herself, if she's got stress incontinence, so the one where you wet yourself a little bit, if you laugh or cough or sneeze, 6 sessions of physio cures 83% of these problems. So if we can get them either self-managing or then in to see us, then they get better. And this is something that really bothers me, because if we don't treat them, then it tends to get worse over time, and they start to change how they live. So they stop drinking so much because they're worried they're going to have an accident. So that means that they're dehydrated, and that's linked with constipation. And if you have problems, if you're constipated, then that's the #1 risk for developing a vaginal prolapse. So over time, they land up with quite a complicated setup where they've developed urgency, where they have to go for a pee, but they have to go now. They don't have an ability to wait because they've been so anxious about wetting themselves that they start going just in case, and it changes the whole way that their bladder works. Those women, if we can get them into clinic, then they get better just with advice and exercises and, you know, stuff that physio usually does. But it's shame and stigma that surround anything to do with women's genitals and reproductive health as per usual. So I had a patient that told me a really funny story about her wetting herself on her doorstep, and it was a terrible story because she had like lost all the urine out of her bladder in one go, so there was no hiding it, and she was standing in front of her neighbour who had seen her wet herself. But this woman was from Glasgow, so she was just funny. And the way that she told the story was hilarious. So she knew that I had a hobby of doing stand-up comedy, and I said to her, can I use that story on stage? And I did 5 minutes at a comedy club. And afterwards, 4 women said to me, oh, me too. Now, they didn't know that it was my job, and they hadn't spoken to a GP. So I thought, well, maybe if I make it funny, then I can give them the same information as I would do in clinic, but just go out and find them and see if it works. So I make a lot of sort of poorly thought through decisions, and I stay in Edinburgh, so that every year in Edinburgh there's this massive arts festival. It's the biggest, Edinburgh Fringe is the biggest arts festival in the world. So I just applied because I was a bit tipsy, to be honest. I'd been drinking gin and thought, I know what I'll do. And the problem with the Fringe, if you've ever been to it, you'll understand this, is that there's no auditions. There's no like quality control. They'll let anybody in. So before I had sobered up, I had signed myself up to go and do this ludicrous enterprise. But it did work. Like now that I've been doing it for a few years, I do have some data that shows that giving women health information in a comedy setting influences their behaviour. I need to get somebody else to do some proper research into it, but there's enough data there to hopefully get a grant to try and fund that. So I had done this show in a wee basement bar, and thought the average audience for the Fringe is 8. It's between 6 and 8. Hardly anybody comes because there's 3,000 shows. So getting anybody to come to your shows is a challenge. Yeah. And at the weekends, I had 120 in my room. Now, I'd like to think that that's because I'm hilarious, but it's because I'm local. And so I knew where all the mother and toddler groups were. I knew where the soft plays were. And I had sent out posters to all these places in advance. I'd sent them out to the midwives and the GPs, and anybody that would work with pishy women got a poster here I'm doing this show. So that's how it worked. That marketing was just lucky, really, that I understood it because I was local. But if you get a big audience like that, it's an industry, comedy. There's people making a lot of money, some of them. So they spotted that this peculiar person with, no right to be there was getting a big audience. So the following year I did the same show with one of the big venues, and it sold out and it got 5 stars.
Wow.
So then they asked if I would go to Australia with them to the Australian fringes, to which the correct and only response is, why, thanks very much. That would be amazing. But I couldn't actually go with them because there was some family stuff here. So I went myself and went to the Perth Comedy Festival, and I won the Comedy Award with Perth Fringe.
Wow.
So then I was thinking, gosh, this could actually work. Then I came back from Australia 10 days before lockdown. And so then I had, like everybody, 2 years of thinking, well, now what am I going to do? And the problem with being a sort of outsider in any industry is there's a lot of people that get, slightly annoyed that you're doing awful well. And I was told, well, this is just, your one trick pony, one show. So I wrote a second show. The show that I did was about pelvic floors. It was called Gusset Grippers. And the idea was that you left knowing what a pelvic floor is and what it does and what's normal and what's not normal and where to take yours if you think it's a bit wonky. So then I had to come up with a second show. So I wrote one that had been a bit of data that came out that said that 50% of women in the UK weren't confident about which was their vulva and which was their vagina. So obviously that's just scandalous because men can tell the difference between their penis and their testicle generally with some confidence. So I wasn't happy about this. So I wrote a show called Viva Your Vulva, The Whole Story. And the idea was that it was sort of going through what female genitals are and what each bit does. And Jenny made me this most amazing prop that was all magnets. So I could build a vulva with, labia that were on magnets and all just stuck together. It was very clever and sparkly as well. It was ideal for the stage lights. And went through the different bits of anatomy and given women information that they need in order to, live well through their whole life, because sex ed finishes when you leave school, and I don't think it should, because with menopause and just general aging, or we just leave women to find out from other women, and it's just not acceptable. I see this as a massive feminist issue. So because my field, like my scope of practice as a healthcare professional, is with female people, I only wrote about female people in the show because I have to work within my scope. Otherwise I make myself vulnerable professionally, because I've been in trouble before for making comedy about something that's very serious anyway. So I included women that were young up to women that were very elderly, and all different sexualities and gender. So I included trans men and non-binary people on purpose, because if a female person starts taking cross-sex hormones, then they effectively become menopausal from that age. So there are people now that are becoming menopausal 30 years too early. Wow. And we know that there's going to be health consequences for that, because we know that if a woman goes into premature menopause, which is under 45, then the standards in the UK are you would be offered HRT, because it's likely to increase your risk for coronary heart disease and dementia and osteoporosis. So you're offered this treatment as a preventative thing. But there doesn't seem to be anybody concerned about this for this population that are taking cross-sex hormones, knocking out their estrogen. We're just letting them get on with it. And in work, I had seen a person that was 23 years old and had, pain and itching in his vulva. And the problem was that this young person had terrible vaginal atrophy because of the treatment that she was on. The next patient was 83. And if you'd stuck those two people's fannies together, you wouldn't have been able to tell who was who. It was really shocking. And I just thought, what are we doing? This person's come in because they've got a real problem and it's really interfering with her quality of life, and she's upset about it. But there's nothing I can do, because the problem is the treatment. The problem is the transition treatment that this person's on. So I had included that in the show because it would appear I'm not saying that gender clinics aren't giving trans men and non-binary identified females this information, that if they start testosterone, they're going to land up with an old lady fanny. But certainly there is a problem with the way that that's been understood within the community. And the negative effects of transition, so the unwanted side effects of taking cross-sex hormones, are not discussed. Because if they say anything negative, then they get piled on by the community because you're putting other people off. So the people that I have worked with are really distressed because they've got a problem. They don't know where to go for help. The gender clinics are absolutely overwhelmed. So there's no real resource for them to be able to go to. The chances of their GP having much experience of working with people that are transgender is very small. And so they landed up with me going, actually, mate, do you know what? I can give you information, but she would not take estrogen cream. That's the treatment. You get estrogen cream that you just slap onto your fanny for 3 months and it fixes it. But because it said estrogen, totally unacceptable to this person because it was triggering off dysphoria. So I put that into the show because it's the same problem. These people just don't have the information that they need. But I didn't mention trans women at all because they're male. And apparently that's a hate crime.
Is it?
Yeah. So it was really interesting because the venue weren't happy about my show and told me so. And there's some dispute about what exactly was said. I have one version of events and they have another. But I'm quite hard to gaslight. I know what was said. And they hadn't seen it. They hadn't come to see the show that they said was transphobic.
Oh my God.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Absolutely fascinating. Because I had worked with this company for a number of years, like probably 5 years of working relationship. And they knew that I just turned up and did my job and went home. I'm not going to be the act that, sets the comedy world on fire, but I turn up and I tidy up after myself and I'm nice to everybody, and they made money off of me as well. But none of that matters. Everybody, once you start looking at gender and you speak up about it, you really quickly realise that nothing that you've done before that time in your life is of any consequence. You could be the best behaved person in the world and the most giving member of your community.
You could
Every
have
single
rescued kittens from a river and it still wouldn't have mattered.
None of it matters. They will just dismiss what they know about you in order to tar you as being a bigot. So there was a bit of me quite liked it because I'm so boring. I'm so boring and conformist that I've never been the baddie. So when I was going into the venue and all these young people, it was the young staff in particular, who were turning their back on me, and there was a little group of them started hissing when I went past, like it was a pantomime. It was fantastic. Like, oh my goodness, I feel like something out of a film. Like, look at me. I'm a frumpy 50-year-old woman and you're hissing at me, you dickhead. So one of the issues was that the venue had scheduled my show to be on at the same time as another performer who, amongst other things, identifies as a comedian. And that person is a trans woman. And so for reasons unclear, they had put our two shows on at the same time in the same venue. And both me and this other performer think, not that I've ever spoken to that person, but they wrote a very interesting blog all about me. We think that independently that this venue did that on purpose because in the fringe, like, press is currency. So if they could have got a fuss because my audience, generally are women that would like to have education about their bodies, preferably in a single sex environment, in a bar and a toilet with this other person's audience who are part of the transgender community in the main, I think they were hoping for a big stooshy, which you won't know what that is, a stooshy. See, it's what happens if you put Scottish folk on. Like a squabble, like a fight, not a fisticuff fight, just a fuss. And they did get a fuss, but it was a bit like what you were saying, Jenny, that it backfired because it landed being totally in my favour. I was getting a lot of hassle and I was getting real abuse. There was a guy that started yelling at me in the street and spat at me and all that usual stuff that men that are aggrieved over something, he hadn't seen the show, do. But I landed up with this massive amount of press coverage, which is how I landed getting reviewers come in, and both reviewers gave me 5 stars. So I had a sellout show, which wasn't even in my endeavour, because all this bullshit was taking so much time to sort out, like physically to deal with. I didn't have time to go in flyer, because it is difficult to get an audience. Then I was getting a bit nervous about it because it's expensive to do the fringe and I wasn't covering my costs. And I mentioned it in passing to one of the women that's in the networks. And all I said was, I don't exactly remember, but something like, God, I'm going to be in trouble unless I can fix this by next week, because I'm not meeting the number of seats that I need to sell to cover costs. And she went home and set up a WhatsApp group. And this whole network of women just appeared and took my flyers and did it for me.
Oh,
And
brilliant.
it was just,
That's
it was
women for you.
amazing. Aye,
That's
because
her for you.
yeah, like I found it really, it was only since yesterday that I was able to start talking about it without bursting into tears, because
Aw.
it was really lovely. Like, it was actually like the sisterhood is a real thing. I hadn't
Yeah.
asked them to do this, but it was like, you know, the deeds, not words. They just did it. It was amazing. So
Yeah.
they totally saved my bacon, and now I'm in this big debt of gratitude that I need to pay forward, because that's how it works, isn't it? It was just really, really, really good fun. So I've kind of scored, because now I've got 2 sellout 5-star shows with great reviews.
Wow.
And the person that was unhappy with me has just got a lot of bad press. So
And wasn't it a case where theirs wasn't as successful as yours, and they tried to blame us evil turfs for it?
that was fascinating. So yes, there was a train of thought. I'm not sure where it came from, but there was a blog written explaining about why the fringe didn't go very well for this person. Now, normally, if you have a trouble getting an audience, or if they come in and they sit with their arms folded and nobody laughs, maybe that's because you're not very funny. You know, most of the time it's because you've had an off night. You know, you are good at what you're doing, but you've had an off night. That happens to everybody. But if it happens consistently, maybe it's not them. It's a real, like, you really shouldn't blame your audience, because it's your job to make them laugh. Anybody could sit in a room and not make people laugh. That's easy to do. But this person was convinced that somebody, me, had been organising an army of people to go in and buy tickets for the show and sit in the front row with their arms folded and not enjoy themselves, and believes this.
Yeah.
So the blog thing was fascinating, because none of it was true. And one of the things was apparently because of my attitude to trans women, which I find fascinating, because I never say anything publicly about trans women because I can't back it up, because it's not in my scope of practice. So I don't have an opinion about trans women. I'm only interested in female people. I'm really fascinated by them. I'm not really bothered. And this person was also very upset because I hadn't asked him how he was. Like, do you think I'm your mum? I've never.
They all do. They
I've
all
never.
think women are their mums.
Exactly. You're 35 years old.
I like the idea that lots of Scottish women would go and spend an extra £15 on a ticket to not laugh.
No.
Not a Scottish woman trait at
ridiculous.
all, I don't think.
There is a bit of me was reading. I mean, I haven't paid that much attention to what was said because I'm busy. But there was a bit of me when I was reading it thinking, is this person actually in trouble? Because this is so deluded. It's so nonsensical. It's so far removed from the reality of what happens. Like, are they actually, they've had a terrible experience for 3.5 weeks. Has it had an impact on them? And is somebody looking after them? Because this, you know, it just doesn't read encouragingly. But we're not to believe that these people, you know, it's not a mental health problem. It's just something nebulous. It's something that's, you know, can't measure it objectively. You can't see it in an x-ray. You can't measure it in a blood test. It's just something, this gender issue. And if they transition, then it's going to fix all their problems. But I'm yet to see any evidence to support that. And there's a group in the UK called CanSig, which is a name that they debated over for quite a long time. And it's not a great name. it's set up by doctors, so they like to name things in letters that are quite hard to Google. So it stands for Clinical and Academic Network in Sex and Gender. And we're on Twitter, so at CAN and then a wee hyphen SG. And it's a growing number of clinicians. It started off mainly medics, but there's a token physio in now. There's quite a lot of psychologists, some midwives, some nurses. I think there's one OT. And before I joined, they had been going through the evidence that the likes of WPATH had put out to look at the quality of the evidence, and they've debunked it. There's a group in the UK, there's an organisation called the Cochrane Review, which is how the NHS works. So the Cochrane Review looks at a topic like, say, hip replacements, and it goes through all the published evidence, works out what best practice is, and that's how the NHS runs. Because they look at the good data and they just base it on science. And in 40 years of gender papers in the literature and them doing research into this phenomenon, not one single paper meets the criteria for being in a Cochrane Review, because the science is rubbish.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm trying really hard to dislike this other performer, but there have no consequence to me in my life. But actually, I feel really sorry for them, because perhaps it will work. There are people that do benefit from transition, and that it definitely seems to make their lives manageable. But they seem to be becoming increasingly rare. The more people that transition, the number that actually seem to have a better life than they would have done if they hadn't taken all of these treatments and surgeries seems to be reducing based on science that's not science. Like, I'm talking about things like the Reddit thread for detransitioners, and somebody had sent me another one on Reddit about, surgeries that they've had that just, it's not worked for them.
Yeah.
I think there was data published that apparently the suicide risk goes up actually after 7 years after they transitioned or had their surgeries. It's actually, that's when their highest suicide risk is.
Yeah, because my own personal, this is opinion, this isn't data, is that they're being sold a lie, and that's devastating. That they're told, you can be, you can be a woman, you can be a man, and I feel really strongly that the gender clinics should be very clear that that's not what's happening. You can't change sex. Even when we talk about it in healthcare, the way that these people are referred to is as a male to female transgender person. Well, that's factually incorrect. They're a male person transitioning to being a feminine male. You can't change sex, so we shouldn't be using the words male and female to mean anything about gender, because that just leads to this confusion. The sort of the people's ability to understand health information is generally pretty poor, because we're not given enough education. So when you go in, you've developed diabetes, they need to explain to you how to manage your diabetes in a way that you understand. And endocrinology and hormones, it's all very complex, high-tech stuff. So we need to be able to take the same approach to gender and just say, these are the facts. You have to get your head around that. If you've got difficulty accepting it, then there should be support services in place, because otherwise I'm not convinced that we're not doing harm.
Well, I think I'll just quickly say, can I just quickly add on to that, Iris? Like, I had my problems, right, after the birth, and the pelvic floor woman, she had basically written, no, nothing present, whatever, no prolapse present, whatever. And I knew that there was something wrong. Telling me that I had postnatal depression, and if I was okay down here, that this down here wouldn't matter. And I kept saying, no, if I was okay down here, I wouldn't be up here.
Yeah.
Anyway, as I said, I was in the mother and baby unit because I wasn't getting the proper, this was what was causing my distress, and nobody would help me. They kept telling me there's nothing wrong. But so I went to Ross Hall, the private place, and I went to a urologist or whatever it was. And he said, oh yeah, there's 3, whatever it is. But even if, I'm too young for any, operations or whatever, because bear in mind, this was 6 years ago, and my head was totally fried because of this, like literally suicidal. And but even then they said to me, but if you wanted to have an operation, I wouldn't advise it, you're young, blah, blah, blah. but also you wouldn't be able to get it just now while you're under psychiatric care. So even if I was able to get an operation that I physically needed that would help me in my body and my mind, because my mind wasn't in the right place, I wouldn't be able to get that operation that would actually help me. But these children get operations that won't help them, it'll make them worse when they're actually mentally not well. No, we don't do that in any other part of medicine that I know of.
No, Stella O'Malley's talked about that in her podcast, you know, through a gender, through a wider lens, about why are we treating a mental health issue, because a lot of these people do also have, perhaps it's not the cause of it, but they do also have other distresses and diagnosable conditions. But why are we treating it with a knife? It makes no sense. And I mean,
I don't hear stories that they're being interrogated or other issues looked at. They just instantly affirm.
Yeah, which is
it's dangerous.
Coming from people who, when you look at, like, say, Mermaids that's in the press at the moment, when you look at who's been on their board and their trustees, they seem to have quite a lot of trustees that don't stay for very long. And then they hang
untoward about paedophiles.
If one that hung on for a while, can't think why, he'd be interested. But they don't have anybody at the moment on the board that's got any expertise on child development. They don't have any psychiatrists, there's no psychologists, there's not even like, you know, a teacher that would understand about how to accommodate these needs within the education system. There's literally just people that have either come from the third sector, so they're lobbyists and fundraisers, which, you know, I'm not denigrating their job, but they don't know anything about the topic that they're trying to fundraise for, or they're people whose children have transitioned. And why have we allowed these people that are frankly amateurs to have such influence over something that is just their opinion? I've got plenty of opinions, but the government won't listen to mine. They won't listen to my expertise.
Is that cover of them supposedly looking after children? It gives them that cover where they're just not questioned or scrutinized. Well, they are scrutinized by us, obviously, because we found so many things. But yeah, they're like, if you remember the Kids Company, they were the same until you know, they found all that stuff. So yeah, it's always a cover for them. But I'm glad that everyone can see now exactly how they're being run. Before we move on to Tania, you've been really quiet. I don't know if you've got any questions for the the women here, our Scottish women. Do you have any questions for them?
I'm like, I mean, well, for Star, I was wondering, in America, at women's prisons, they usually bunk together a lot of times. So there was only you were bunked, but like each one was in a single cell by themselves the whole time, 23 hours of the day.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're basically in, I think maybe from about 8 o'clock at night, you know, you're locked up, and that's right through the night until the morning, and you don't get out in the morning. You'll get your breakfast thrown into you, so it's like a bag of cereal and some milk. You don't have a fridge or anything like that to put it in either, so if it's summer, it's kind of, so you then won't be allowed out to cell again unless you've put in for a shower. You'll be allowed out, I think it's half an hour maybe for a shower. I think you maybe get out 15-20 minutes for lunch, and the same for dinner. But you do get an hour's outside recreation every day if you want it. So most of the women, they are kind of in their cell 23 hours a day because they don't go to education, they don't go to the gym, they don't go to these things. They're very vulnerable women who are, a lot of them are drug addicted. You know, they've got a lot of problems as well, physical problems, so they're not wanting to be, you know, but if you go outside, you're not allowed back inside. So if you go out for your hour exercise, if you go outside, you can't go back inside early. So for me, especially, like, outside is a lot of where they do their drug dealing and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Or, you know, whatever they're doing, right?
Yeah.
And I was in there in winter time, so in Scotland it's terrible. So I went out when it was dry, but I didn't go out when it was wet because there wasn't really, you know, didn't want to go out and get wet and
Right.
come in early. So and obviously it would cause a lot of problems, because if I demanded to get inside, all the women would have to be brought inside, and then that would cause a problem for me.
Mhm.
So even then, a lot of the women wouldn't even go out at, you know, at the exercise time. And, you know, just as Elaine's been saying before about how important women's health is and their exercise is for their cardiovascular system and their pelvic floor, and you'll obviously know, you know, women should be not lifting weights, but they should be doing weight bearing exercises, you know, for their bones and stuff like that. And so when you part from me not being able to exercise anymore, the women then, if they did want to go, would have to choose between doing the exercise and having the visit, if they were allowed a visit. So it is very limited, the amount of time that you get out yourselves, really limited.
Jesus. That's so fucked up.
Right, sorry to interrupt, guys. I am conscious of time, so if I can just move over to Tanya, if you can let us know what you've been doing with the WDI, please. It sounds really exciting, because I
Yeah.
missed everything that happened, so I'm relying on you to tell me.
Oh Lord. I'm not the best prior for that though, because the week leading up was like crunch time. So we just basically, you know, that whole week was just rearranging stuff and getting things printed. I'm 2 hours south of DC in Virginia. So pretty much so I brought all like the printouts that we're gonna give out. We gave out swag bags. I don't know if I have mine like close by to reach, but we had little folders. I was on design team, but I didn't make this design.
Oh,
A
yeah.
wonderful lady named Amy made the design, and it turned out really cool. And then we had all these printouts. I'm like, is that me? Like the feedback? I think so. Sorry. But we printed out our agenda, and it was at DuPont hotels. So you'd go in, check in. The first night, the plenary was second wave women's liberation movement. So we had a lot of women from the second wave speaking. It was really cool because one of the women, Bonnie, I don't know if she wants me to say her last name out loud on air, but she was speaking, and she's from here. She's from my local group, but she's been doing like activism forever. And I was staying with her. And she wanted me to we printed out her like original posters. This is like the Miss America pageant, like poster when they like went to the Miss America pageant, like I don't know, in like the 70s. That's where like the big myth came that everyone set their bras on fire, but all they did was put like their bras and their girdles in the trash. But she said it was, people were really pissed off and violent during that time. But this is like another one of her posters. I'm like, I don't know. It's just super cute. But yeah, the plenary was cool. The agenda was cool. It was like we would meet up. There was breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And during those times there would be like big talks, and then there would be breakout rooms, which would be in like different convention halls, almost like it would be with Zoom, but you could choose between two things. Like one of the breakout rooms, let me see here. would be Then and Now, Feminist Opposition to the Sex Trade, which had Melissa Farley and Genevieve Gluck. And then during lunch, like the next day, I guess on Saturday, The Importance of Nonviolent Action and Building a Culture of Resistance. Leah Keith spoke at that. We had like a women's writing plenary. Phyllis Chesler spoke at that with Genevieve Gluck. Women's organizing and grassroots activism, that was really cool. Suzanne Forbes Verling spoke at that. Julie Black, Jessica Gonzalez. There was a breakout room on consciousness raising in the women's liberation movement, and that had Kathy Sarah Child, who was with the Red Stocking movement. She's an American feminist writer. There's just so many like awesome people there.
And did they cover everything to do with feminism, or was it just turf stuff?
It was everything to do with feminism. Yeah, it was everything to do with feminism. I mean, we talked about like, you know, the harm of gender and stuff like that. And that came into play, you know, into like conversations and things like that, of course. How could it not? But it was mostly just, you know, talking about feminism and what does victory look like. And there's just like a lot of great speakers and speeches. And like the age range was just so awesome. It was like teenagers up to like 91 years old, you know? So there was like, yeah, it was really cool. I missed a lot of like speeches because when I showed up, I didn't even sleep the night before. I just like got on the train with Bonnie and just like shot up there. And to make sure that like, you know, the things, because we gave out like tote bags with the folders with like the agenda and the posters and a printout of the declaration and a few other things in the folders, and then pens with like our little logo on it and a composition book for women to be able to take notes. So yeah, and then there was check-in and dinner that night, and that's like when the second waivers all spoke, which was really cool. And it was awesome because we were all staying there, you know, so it was just like, I don't know, it was just really cool to meet so many women that I have talked to online for years, and just to be able to like meet them and hang out in person. Oh god, the dogs are gonna start freaking out. But yeah, it was great. I had a great time just like hanging out with a lot of the older women. I would just like be sitting down and be hanging out with like a woman like a lot older than me, like women in their 80s, and they're not super online. So, you know, they would be like, well, what does that mean? And what does that mean when it came to like little acronyms and stuff like that, like DMPM, and I feel like direct message. And I got just so many emails and stuff from women, which was cool. And they asked about like my emails, my information, and there was a cool lobbying breakout room, and I spoke up at that, and a lot of women like came up to talk to me afterwards.
So what did you speak out? What did you speak about in the breakout room?
What did I speak about? Well, basically, so people were talking about lobbying. So Bonnie and Julie Black were speaking about lobbying in the States, and there was a lot of women, just like so many questions. And then there was you know, a lot of women were talking about how they feel about you know, lobbying, but also like with the right, and also how they're much easier to deal with, and how do they like deal with their feelings about that. And I just spoke up and was like, listen, this is a war on women, and I don't know about you guys, but I'm not married to any side of this, and I never really was politically involved until like this all started happening. So really the best way to do this is just to be strategic and to not act like any of these people give a shit about you, because they don't. And you also have to know your state and local laws really well, which is really important because each state is very different here and how they do things, and especially locally. So it just, my mom is driving me nuts. She lives with me. You can hear her talking to the dogs. Just like, I need to like fucking close the door. But yeah, I just was like, for instance, I lobbied a lot in, not only my states, but in other states. And you can, because of COVID, it's all over Zoom. So, as long as you get one constituent in another state, like if you want to get a whole group together, you get them together, you know what I mean? And then we'd usually do like a practice run of what we were going to do the night before. And if, and just pay attention to, we have an upcoming election. So it's like, pay attention to what spots are opening up and who's running for what. And you can request like a meeting with anybody and their staffers if you'd like, and grill them if you'd like, to find out where they stand on women's rights and their reproductive rights. So like, we have Yunkin, and you hear a lot of people bitch about that, especially like the the whatever you guys call them, the head girls. And but people don't understand is that, like, for one, here, which is different than like Philadelphia or Pennsylvania or New Jersey, is the governor after 4 years here, once he ran and he's been the governor, he can't run again for another 4 years after his governorship or whatever is over. And here, like within the Senate, the Democrats have the majority, the Congress, it's majority Republican. So really, like, for instance, I know he's talking about like abortion, bringing it down to 15 weeks. Like the thing is we all know that that's just going to die. It's going to go through Congress and then it's going to die in Senate. So it's really not, it's just something to make his base happy. But these are just really important things to pay attention to try to be able to like keep people in certain areas, in your state, and also to be able to find your allies and how to gain intel. Like one of the things I said is I do catering sometimes, and I get catering jobs sometimes from a friend, and they'll have like every politician, when they win or do something, they usually do something at the art museum, and I'll usually cater the events. But just small things like that, and just getting involved with your local community and your representatives, and just knowing who they are and talking to them, and just like forming, a cordial relationship. Because, and also when you're reaching out to like Democrats, they are either are complete idiots, they don't know what they're talking about, and then you just like blow their minds, but they still are just like, oh well, they're still going to vote this way, and it's really good to threaten your vote and to just say, we're not going to do this. And then the other part of it is just sociopaths that know what they're doing and they don't give a shit. They're just like, they don't care about the women in prison, they don't care about women getting harmed in domestic violence shelters, they don't care about little girls being able to have safety in their bathrooms. They do not care.
Has WDI published anything anywhere about the conference? Do you know, is there a YouTube or anything like that?
Well, they didn't want to allow like video recording, so women would be able to feel able to just express themselves without feeling like a threat. But I know that they did record this, like Kathy Sarahchild, I believe, like speaking, I think it was like half an hour long, and it should be on the YouTube. It was the radical feminist structural analysis. So that was recorded. And it's like blurry where like everyone's sitting, but you can like see the speakers clearly. So that was up. I know they put that up. But other than that, there wasn't any like video recording allowed. Even though I think like some women might have video recorded, but I know that we told everyone like no video recording. There's some like snapshots taken of like people's slides and stuff like that. But yeah, other than that, I know if you go on like the US WDI site, you can see like the whole like agenda there and what the different speeches were on and what speakers were speaking and stuff like that. But other than that, yeah, there wasn't any other recordings besides the feminist analysis that should be on the WDI's like channel.
So looking forward to Thursday, is that being recorded? I'm assuming it is.
Yes, speeches will be recorded, and we'll be tweeting under Women Won't Waste and Women's Rally under those hashtags.
Oh, brilliant. Yes, I was going to ask that. Yeah, hashtags always important. For Women Scott, is it going to be on the For Women Scotland web YouTube?
Yeah, they'll probably tweet out some of the speeches and they'll put it on their YouTube channel and things like that.
Oh, brilliant. That's
And
excellent.
then we'll go to the pub.
What?
Yay!
No, surely not. Nobody will like that.
When I go to these meetings, because I'm always busy doing stuff, but the pub is always the best part for me, because I can always watch the speeches later if I have to, but the pub really is, because you get to unwind and you get to chat to everyone, catch up, discuss what you've been up to, discuss what you want to get up to, arrange to get together here, do this, do that. It's brilliant.
Yes, it's really quite important to the movement as well, the socializing aspect.
Yeah,
we're all kind of some of us are anonymous online and things like that, so it really is really important to get talking to real people and generating ideas and things like that.
Yeah. Oh, that's brilliant. All right, conscious of time, so thank you so much, all of you, for taking part. We're really grateful that you could do it at such short notice as well. So thank you so much. This has been Wombs with a View. We hope you enjoy this show, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.